fuck is going on. I don't know what the fuck is going on. So I ain't pressing nothing. Nothing. Okay, so we back live. Back live. So let's get back into it.
Primarily with CGI. For one of the first times, a CG character was going to have a starring role alongside his live-action counterparts, with initial plans to have Ahmed Best in partial costume that had been given a digital head replacement to create the finalized look. And then came the hardest role to cast by a long shot, Anakin Skywalker, the young Darth Vader himself, who in this movie was going to be portrayed as just 9 years old. The casting process was intense. Casting a child actor is really tough. Finding a child actor that would work is really tough. Over the casting process, there were around 3,000 kids interviewed for the part of Anakin. That pool eventually narrowed down more and more until finally landing on the one kid that would take the franchise away, 8-year-old Jake Lloyd. With him joining the cast, the main ensemble was complete. The central cast of the next Star Wars movie was now in place, and excitement only built up for the day production would begin. The budget was set for a whopping $115 million this time, which is far and away the biggest budget for any of these movies, partly thanks to inflation. Gotta love that stuff. And following in the footsteps of Return of the Jedi, Episode 1 began shooting under a working title to hide itself at least a little bit from the outside world. This time it was all under the pseudonym, The Dollhouse. But it's also worth noting that expectations for this movie behind the scenes were much different than they were last time, specifically around the man himself, George Lucas. On the first movie, George Lucas was just another filmmaker. He had a successful hit with American Graffiti, which made some actors eager to work with him, but outside of that, he was just a filmmaker with a hugely ambitious dream. But this time, perception of him was much different. He was the creator of Star Wars, the greatest adventure the world had ever seen, and now he's back in that universe again to tell new stories. So, the cast and crew alike were riding into production on faith that Lucas would be able to wow audiences again just like he had 20 years before. Want to catch lightning in a bottle a second time? Good thing you have the guy that did it the first time. All of which led to June 26, 1997, the first day of principal photography on Episode 1. Production took place in a bunch of different places, but it was primarily conducted in Leavesden Studios in England, a large building where the crew would work closed off from the outside world in a controlled environment. One goal Lucas had following the original trilogy was to make filmmaking easier. The original movies were nightmares to put together, especially on set, with troubles plaguing almost every aspect. So the process became not just for Episode 1, but the entire new trilogy to find a way to make everything far easier and more reliable on set. More shooting on stages, heavier use of blue screens, a lot more controlled environments. George Lucas even wanted to transition to filming with digital cameras, but the manufacturers he was looking into wouldn't have the cameras ready in time. So, like the originals, Episode 1 was once again shot on film. This is only where the process began for making filmmaking easier. This was merely the first step that'd take the entire trilogy to fully work out, which is why Episode 1 still had a bevy of location shooting throughout its production. Filming was conducted at Castlebury Park in Watford, Hertfordshire. The crew journeyed to the Caserta Palace in Italy, which doubled for the palace on the new world of Naboo. And of course, the movie was going to return to the desert planet of Tatooine. So the crew returned to the desert of Tunisia, the same country Lucas had filmed in 20 years before. This time, they built a massive town set outside of the city of Tozeur, huge living and breathing location bustling with crazy space aliens and new creatures. But as is to be expected with location shooting, especially for George Lucas, problems inevitably arose. At the end of July, while filming in Tunisia, a huge storm raged over the area, with lightning strikes and huge winds rushing over. The next morning, once the storm had subsided, the crew found the set and the props for the pod race almost entirely destroyed. Fortunately, George Lucas himself was pretty calm and collected about all of this, and the team got back to work to rework the schedule and repair what had been damaged.
I'd say it's good luck.
It is good luck.
It happened last time, and it happened this time. Almost, it's like reliving it.
That wasn't the only production mishap, though, as there were more general things like the R2-D2 prop not working the best. Kenny Baker would still be the pilot for some R2-D2 props, but others were going to be driven remotely, almost like a real droid. Almost. But the props weren't the best at terrain, door lifts, that kind of stuff. So two separate teams worked on two different R2-D2 props that could handle what this movie needed, all to make them far more seamless with the larger production. There were still misadventures and challenges along the way, but there were also big, exciting moments, like the filming of a climactic lightsaber duel. George Lucas stressed the notion that this movie was set during the golden age of the Jedi, and as a result, the lightsaber fight here would be leagues beyond what was seen in the originals, all of which was choreographed by Nick Giller, who worked with the actors involved to create the fastest, most intense sequence he could. And Ray Park, who plays the mysterious villain, was a great help given his fighting and martial arts background. The actors trained for months to hone in on the exact movements and choreography that'd make the fight. Then you had the technological advances during shooting. As mentioned, the initial plans for Jar Jar Binks were to simply replace his head with CG, leaving the body as it was on set. But after doing some early tests and rendering out the character in different ways, it was discovered that it was easier to replace Ahmed Best entirely with CGI, while still using the on-set suit for lighting and performance reference to make it look as real as possible. And ultimately, filming on Episode 1 came to a close on September 30th, 1997. After a few months across the world, the cast and crew finally wrapped production on the very beginning of the Star Wars
Oh, it was only 7 months.
which dovetailed right into 1998, where this movie would face an exceptionally long post-production timeline. The movie was going to have nearly 2 years devoted to just post-production to get the huge effects pipeline through the door and into movie theaters. The visual effects work on this movie was leagues beyond what any other movie had attempted. The team at ILM was going to create enormous sequences that were going to make entirely CG landscapes and areas, and building off of the discovery made during production that Jar Jar would be entirely CGI, Ahmed Best was brought back to the motion capture stage to record his movements for the character during post, meaning that for the first time, an entirely CG character was created with use of motion capture. It wasn't all digital, however. Some of the things Lucas wanted for the movie still weren't entirely achievable through digital effects. While backgrounds were created for the pod race sequence, the rest of the movie featured a lot of models for backdrops. From big to small, there were tons of physical models that would then be digitally composited into the sequences. The movie's editing also made big strides. This time around, the movie was edited by Paul Martin Smith and Ben Burtt. Ben Burtt, of course, was the lead sound designer on the original trilogy, creating some of the most iconic sounds in film history. Now, he'd be instrumental in editing the new chapter George Lucas had in mind. And thanks to the evolution of digital non-linear editing, they could do absolutely crazy things. In the past, whenever you didn't like one thing in a particular take, you throw the whole thing out. It's a bad take. Get rid of it. But now, Lucas was able to mix and match different takes together. If you like this part from take 2 and that part from take 5, do a bit of trickery and combine them to make the ultimate shot as good as it could be. The power of digital editing, the power of unlimited potential, exactly what George Lucas was after. The huge post-production process continued all throughout the year, with visual effects, sound, and editing coming together in time for the rough cut, a stage in post-production where the entire creative leadership behind the movie got together and watched it front to back. For the first time, with the movie assembled, they'd all see it played down. Unfortunately, the rough cut was not the greatest. Now, it's not uncommon for rough cuts to be disastrous, but it is interesting to see the faces of the key creatives behind the movie all in a bit of disbelief of what they've seen, with big questions being raised about the editing and story decisions, particularly around the finale.
I may have gone too far in a few places.
Luckily, this was just the rough cut, and in one of George Lucas's better financial decisions, he decided to allocate some of the budget towards a period of reshoots. On the original movies, it wasn't uncommon for the crew to go back and redo scenes if they weren't working. Unfortunately, that did balloon the budget and extend the shooting schedule in ways that weren't anticipated. So, knowing that that was a likely possibility, reshoots were built in for the plans around Episode 1 from the very beginning. And starting in August of 1998, Lucas returned to set to film bits and pieces of the movie to help round it out and make it better. Meanwhile, on the outside, the fan base was watching intently to gather any information they could about the new movie. They could not be more excited. The clock was ticking by day, with every minute, every hour that went by, the next brand new Star Wars movie ticked closer and closer. The fan base had many questions about what the storyline could be, how the characters would interact, how it would set up the entire trilogy, but the biggest question for fans was by far, what's it going to be called? Internally at Lucasfilm, the movie was simply referred to as The Beginning. But that's not really going to work, is it? You gotta have something a bit more extravagant than The Beginning.
Literally.
Thankfully, there was something a bit more
It's not
extravagant.
literally the beginning.
Because on September 25th, 1998, fans around the world were greeted with the first big announcement for the new movie. It was going to be called Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. And the fan base responded with a resounding, what? That's an odd title. It doesn't sound quite the same as something like Empire Strikes Back or Return of the Jedi. Polls were held online, and while some people had faith in George Lucas and believed it would all ultimately work out, others were more concerned. It didn't sound quite right. But any fears created by the title were soon squashed, as it was only the first piece of news of many. Because 2 months later, in November of 1998, the Star Wars fan base was brought together as one for the immensely exciting release of the very first teaser trailer for Episode 1. On November 17th, playing in theaters in front of the movie Meet Joe Black, people could lay their eyes on the very first official footage from The Phantom Menace. It was so exciting, in fact, that people would go to the theater only for the Phantom Menace trailer. They'd show up, buy their ticket for Meet Joe Black, watch the trailer, and then leave.
Crazy!
That was it. At the same time, the trailer was available for download on StarWars.com. Spending the entire day on dial-up internet, fans around the world would download the trailer just to see it in all of its 5 glorious pixels. And initial reactions to the trailer were absolutely stellar. People walking out of the theater or watching it on repeat at home were blown away. And that's because the trailer's incredible. Across 2 minutes, this trailer packs a wallop. Big, exciting sequences, looks at new and familiar characters, the meeting of Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi, alongside teases towards the ultimate fate of the young boy and the threat of the dark side. Which was even complemented by this poster, showing young Anakin Skywalker in front of the old homestead with his shadow taking the form of Darth Vader. The whole trailer was complete with the opening taglines, "Every generation has a legend. Every journey has a first step. Every saga has a beginning." And whoa, that guy's got a double-bladed lightsaber. Dude, are you seeing this? That lightsaber battle's gonna be unreal. There was nothing more exciting right now than the release of the Phantom Menace trailer. And with it opening up to further screenings, playing in front of The Waterboy, The Siege, and A Bug's Life, it became the go-to trailer for all moviegoers. It was equally, if not more exciting to see this trailer as it was to see the movies it was playing in front of. And the internet downloads broke records, with 1 million downloads recorded in the first 24 hours of the trailer's release.
Crazy.
The most downloads for any movie trailer ever. Any fears about the title were long washed to the past. The Phantom Menace looked amazing, and there was only a few months left before it would storm into theaters and restart the Star Wars journey for the entire world.
been hyped too. I ain't gonna lie. I would have been
Parts
hyped.
of the original movies, which
I would have been hyped
the
too.
biggest aspect was the music. Across all three movies, John Williams absolutely killed it, which is why it was a no-brainer to bring him back for the new movies. In February of 1999, recording finally began at Abbey Road Studios for John Williams' brilliant new score. Since this movie was set several decades before the originals, the decision was made to create a whole bunch of new tracks to separate this trilogy from the first. There would be some themes worked in from the originals, but this era would be dominated by a whole new sound. Particularly, the score this time would work a lot more with a choir, vocals, a chorus, all to help elevate the music to a more mystical and ethereal place, which became the central focus of the most iconic piece of music, Duel of the Fates, which would be used for the climactic lightsaber duel. Once again, just like the previous movies, John Williams' score was able to exceed expectations, and even among fans patiently or even impatiently waiting for the new movie, the music was going to be one of the most exciting aspects. And as the months ticked by and Phantom Menace came closer and closer, the marketing really began to heat up. While there had been a trailer released so far, things were soon about to explode. Fans were greeted by an all-new theatrical poster with artwork by Drew Struzan revealing the cast of characters in a breathtaking new image. And on March 12, 1999, playing in front of the movie Wing Commander, 20th Century Fox and Lucasfilm debuted the second full trailer for The Phantom Menace.
That's crazy. That was their first movie working on together before Scooby-Doo. After you lived in Freddie Perez Jr. Ooh.
Across another 2 minutes, this trailer is the greatest look yet at the story this new movie is going to tell, revealing that a droid force is invading the peaceful world of Naboo, and our heroes must team up with the people on the surface to fight back, eventually roping in the one and only Anakin Skywalker to become a larger part of the ongoing adventure. The details of how it was all going to fit together were still up for debate, but this trailer was the best look anyone had into what George Lucas had cooked up for the first of this new trilogy. But if you thought the promotion for Phantom Menace was crazy so far, oh boy, you're in for a wild ride. Because on the last push before Episode 1's May 19th release, this movie took over. The real lucrative corner of promotion came with toys and merchandising, building off of the original trilogy, which had excelled in this area. Although the distribution of toy rights was quite different this time. Before, Kenner had sole rights to create and distribute Star Wars toys, and George Lucas was only able to gain 2.5% of revenue generated by toy sales, something he wasn't that happy with. But after the conclusion of the original trilogy, Kenner became significantly less profitable. They were eventually bought out by Tonka, who were then eventually bought out by Hasbro. But bigger than that, in order to maintain the rights to Star Wars toys in perpetuity, it was written into their contract that they had to pay $10,000 a year to George Lucas, either via the profits they had made or via a simple check. But for one reason or another, they didn't do that. Suddenly, the contract was voided, and Lucas swiftly reclaimed all toy rights for Star Wars, able to distribute them as he pleased. George Lucas went everywhere for The Phantom Menace, partnering with tons of venues and licensors to plaster Episode 1 on anything humanly possible. Of course, Hasbro would eventually get a piece of the pie, becoming one of the biggest partners for Phantom Menace toys, but considering Lucas's far stronger negotiating stance, he was able to strike a significantly better deal for himself. Instead of making 2.5% off of toy sales like before, he'd now take home 18% of all toy sales. A historic deal. George Lucas made out like a bandit because of this, in a deal that has humorously been referred to as George's Revenge. Thanks to this, The Phantom Menace launched into stores through 1999. You could actually call it an invasion, just like the one those droids were doing in the trailer. You had legions of toys and action figures, you had food like candies, chocolates, and even a Jar Jar tongue candy, which I'm sure some people were big fans of it. 2 video games were made in conjunction with the movie. You had the film adaptation itself, also titled The Phantom Menace, and then you had Episode 1 Racer, which allowed you to take part in speedy pod races just like the one seen in the movie. Then came the 2 most lucrative deals. The first with Pepsi, who put forward a whopping $2 billion to sponsor both Phantom Menace and its 2 eventual sequels, which have now been confirmed to arrive in 2002 and 2005 respectively, which was one of the biggest licensing deals in entertainment history. And then, of course, Star Wars made a deal with Lego. For the first time, Lego tried their hand at licensing to create new themed sets centering around the galaxy far, far away. At first, early in 1999, they released sets based on the original trilogy. X-Wings, TIE Fighters, you name it. But then, as Phantom Menace's release drew nearer, Lego expanded to making sets of anything and everything that had appeared in the movie. This was the beginning of a long-standing partnership between the 2 companies, with LEGO continuously making bigger and better sets around some of the most iconic Star Wars vehicles and ideas. The Phantom Menace was bigger than anything else in the world. You couldn't go 2 feet without seeing Episode 1 written on something, anything, out on the street. In fact, given the immense amount of hype, the official Star Wars fan club hosted the very first Star Wars celebration in Denver, Colorado. Running from April 30th to May 2nd, this brought together over 20,000 Star Wars fans in their collective love of Star Wars and their unwieldy excitement for the franchise's grand return. Excitement for this movie was on a level that had never been seen before. Everyone around the world knew The Phantom Menace was coming, and so many people were lined up in droves to be the first to see it for themselves, which meant the box office prospects were absolutely immense. If any movie could dethrone Titanic as the biggest movie of all time, it was this. People were lined up to get tickets for days before the release. They were lined up in droves to get in for the midnight launch. People took time off work, they called in sick, they skipped school. It was an event unlike any other.
I've been waiting 15 years since Return of the Jedi came out to see the prequel.
There's no way it's going to be a disappointment.
Are there any of you that think this is going to be a lousy movie?
Yeah!
Premiere events across the country brought fans together under one collective umbrella. Star Wars fans were reunited around the world to see what George Lucas had in store for them. And finally, after 16 years since the release of Return of the Jedi, after 5 years since Lucas announced his plan to create an all-new trilogy, it was time for the journey to begin again. The clock had now turned to May 19th, 1999. So grab your seats, get out your popcorn, Pepsi, and lightsabers, because the day has finally arrived. We're about to watch Episode 1. Turmoil has engulfed the Galactic Republic. The taxation of trade routes to outlying star systems is in dispute.
What?
Huh. That doesn't sound right. But that's just the crawl. It might be overloaded with seemingly superfluous political details, but it's just the crawl. We then tilt down to the opening scene, in which our main characters slowly dock their ship inside of a Trade Federation blockade hangar. There's something off about this.
I have a bad feeling about this.
Yeah, you said it. The opening crawl has always been a staple of Star Wars, the punchy opening number to thrust us into the opening scene with purpose. And while this does give context for the scene we're about to jump into, it doesn't do so with excitement and verve, it does so mathematically, algorithmically to a certain extent. But I'm getting ahead of myself, surely. We've only just started. There's plenty more movie to go, right? This movie sees the Trade Federation attempt to invade the peaceful world of Naboo and force Queen Amidala, the planet's ruler, to sign a treaty to make it legal. Now, 2 Jedi, Qui-Gon Jinn and his Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi, who were originally sent to negotiate with the Federation, are now tasked with protecting the Queen and getting her back to the capital world of the Republic, Coruscant, so that they can fight back against the invasion and stop the Trade Federation. Along the way, they arrive on Tatooine, running into a young Anakin Skywalker, who changes their fate in a huge way as the story of the saga kicks off. But unfortunately, the movie leaps through some of these developments at a breakneck pace. It's moving so fast it's hard to keep up. We start with the negotiations, then there's a bit of action against droids, we journey to the planet below, we see an underwater city, there's a whole scene of our heroes evading giant fish.
There's always a bigger fish.
There are more droid clashes, and then there's an escape from Naboo by breaking through the Trade Federation's blockade. And all of that happens in the first 30 minutes of the movie. It feels clear that the movie's trying to show off its technical prowess and creative ideas as soon as possible, but it's ultimately quite tonally uneven. Any one of these ideas could be expanded far more and potentially become a real and true part of the story. As it stands, it sometimes feels like I'm watching a tech demo. It's moving really fast, which gives this feeling of whiplash as each scene transitions to the next. And that also makes the later stretches of the movie all the more jarring because once the characters leave Naboo, the pace slows right the hell down. A very big section of the movie takes place on Coruscant, and it is very slow. The movie's introducing a bunch of ideas. It's interesting to see the Republic in its prime before the eventual formation of the Empire, and it's interesting that the movie's getting into how this institution isn't the best. With a big old vote of no confidence given to Chancellor Valorum, that's big. But as interesting as it might be to parse these ideas and put together the current state of the galaxy, it's not as entertaining to watch. There's gotta be a better way to get across these ideas than to tune into intergalactic C-SPAN.
Will you defer your motion to allow our commission to explore the validity of your accusations?
Despite hopes coming out of the strange opening crawl, it is unfortunate to say that The Phantom Menace is not as good as its predecessor.
Hell no.
It's choppier, it's both faster and slower at the same time.
And that's where I got the fucking R2D2 popcorn bucket and drink the spit whatever.
Talking to each other. It's
Going
not
to see
making
that
a movie
shit.
that emulates the
But
original.
just like I said in my post, I'm just here for Darth Maul. I'm here for the last battle, man. Fuck that. Fuck that, my first time seeing it in theaters, so I wasn't mad. I spent my money. Fuck it.
With George Lucas back in the director's chair, this movie visually takes a lot more cues from the first movie than it does the other two. Once again, the camera's locked off on a tripod most of the time, with occasional pans and tilts here and there. Everything is once again captured with objective framing, the camera simply observing events, never becoming a character in its own right, by design. But as a result, despite this style working on the first movie, it is a lot more dull here. It's mostly down to personal preference, but I can't help but get antsy watching as the movie repeats the same framing and same shot choices the whole way through. Every establishing shot in this movie feels identical. Every conversation is shot in a similar way. Once the camera does move, which it does sometimes during dialogue scenes, it feels like a breath of fresh air.
A surprise, to be sure, but good.
Design-wise, everything feels really clean this time. Maybe a little too clean. I think I really prefer the grime and dirt that was all over the designs in the original movies. Part of what made them so special at the time was that they took space fantasy and made it just as dirty and detailed as the real world. It's entirely admirable, however, that this movie wanted to do something different. They wanted to create a new world. What did Star Wars look like before the Empire? This is the answer, and for that it's commendable. But it's also less interesting to look at in some ways. What really weighs this movie down, though, as mentioned, are the characters. Characters are the heart and soul of stories, especially big traditional crowd pleasers like Star Wars. The original trilogy excelled at characters, and it's exactly why people fell in love so quickly. They wanted to rush away with Luke, become a scoundrel like Han, and were inspired by Leia. Smartly, the choice is made here to create a new batch of characters that feel very different from the trio we got last time. But the bigger question is, who are these new characters? Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan are Jedi, and they're quite stoic. They're monotone, they deliver every line about the same, with a lot of formality in the dialogue. The two of them are very similar as characters. The biggest difference is that Qui-Gon is a gambling addict and Obi-Wan complains all the time.
Why do I sense we've picked up another identifier?
Anakin Skywalker is the young boy version of Darth Vader, of course, from before he's Vader. He's young, he's excitable, I guess. He likes ships, he likes fixing things, so he's got that going for him. And ultimately, I think Jake Lloyd is doing his damnedest with the material he's given, but it would take an incredibly skilled actor to sell the line.
Are you an angel? What?
Padme is also very monotone, very formal in her speech. Initially, she's believed to be one of the Queen's handmaidens, but eventually it's revealed that she's actually the Queen herself. She's Queen Padme Amidala, a reveal that makes her even more monotone than before. For whatever reason, she's doing a deeper voice to make herself sound more imposing, I guess? It's very strange. There is a bright spot here with Senator Palpatine. Once again, Ian McDiarmid is great. While there are fewer opportunities for him to chew the scenery like last time, he does still steal every tiny little look and glance to sell you on a secret evil nature.
We will watch your career with great interest.
Then you have the Jedi Council, another interesting idea. We see Jedi in their prime long before their collapse prior to the original trilogy. But they kind of suck. For one thing, they're also very monotone, very dull. I mean, even Yoda, the greatest character of all time, is somehow boring in this movie. How does that happen? I guess they went all in on the idea that he was testing Luke before, and that's why he was acting crazy. But I don't know, I really liked when Yoda was a crazy little guy.
I'm looking for something. Looking? Found someone you have conversation.
But then there's also the idea that the movie seems to be presenting them as an entirely noble group with their own code of ethics. But the code itself seems like an afterthought and strange. Like you can't train two people at once, but why? Also, the Jedi Council decides that Anakin won't be trained because, let's see here. Right, he's too old.
He's too old.
It made sense when Yoda said it in Empire because at that point Luke was like 20. But this kid's 9. What, do you have to pick him off the shelf when they're still an embryo? I don't understand.
Type
Maybe
shit.
this is just a subtle hint towards the idea that they might be child traffickers. The expansion of the Jedi also brings with it two very big decisions that I personally can't
Me
get behind.
personally, I
Firstly, it's revealed that-
understand completely why they said he was too old. Exactly the reason he turned to the dark side, or at least took the steps to turn to the dark side. Motherly attachment. So like, yeah, catching them bitches fresh out of embryo type shit, that's the best way to do it. That's the best way to do it. I hate to say it, that's so wrong as fuck, but that's the best way to do it. You know? Because if they don't know their parents, they're not going to be emotionally attached to their parents. They was physically attached to their parents, but after birth, that's when they really attached to them. So, you know?
Anakin Skywalker is the chosen one.
You refer to the prophecy of the one who will bring balance to the Force. You believe it's this boy?
This movie introduces a prophecy that one day a virgins in the Force will become destined to bring balance between light and dark. And apparently, good old Shmi Skywalker, Anakin's mother, just became pregnant one day. The Force decided that she would be pregnant, and that's how we got Anakin Skywalker. Meaning he is destined to bring balance to the Force. The intention being that he ultimately does at the end of Return of the Jedi by redeeming himself and throwing the Emperor off the ledge. Anakin Skywalker, Darth Vader, is Space Jesus. But I can't help but think that making Darth Vader the Chosen One absolutely cheapens that moment. Because now it's destined to be this way. It's by the will of the Force that everything worked out, not a genuine character choice that he made in the heat of the moment. I don't like Chosen One stories to begin with. They're so often a cheat code to easily explain why someone is special.
Yeah.
And almost never do they get into how it can negatively impact the supposed Chosen.
Exactly.
Instead of putting in the work to make a character special, the Chosen One idea instantly makes them special through divine intervention. And I think that's kind of lame. Anakin Skywalker's story could work so much better if he's just a boy picked up by the Jedi and ultimately falls from grace. He doesn't need to be Space Jesus. The other thing that I can't really get behind is that this movie felt the need to explain the Force. Yoda and Obi-Wan put it perfectly in the other movies. The Force is an energy field that you can tap into with enough time and patience.
Life believes it. Makes it grow. Its energy surrounds us and binds us.
But this movie says that the Force is actually a collection of microscopic organisms called midi-chlorians, and that the more midi-chlorians you have, the better you'll be at the Force. The Force is not something that needs to be explained like this. Everyone got it the first time. I don't need to know that it's actually a bunch of space germs that make it so that people can lift things with their mind. Now it's significantly less special. It takes something deeply baked in fantasy and turns it into a science.
Type shit.
Now the only way to be good with the Force is not through time and patience, it's if you have enough of the space germs. But it is very funny to imagine the idea that this isn't the first time Qui-Gon's brought a kid to the council thinking he's the chosen one. It's like, bro, this is the 7th kid you brought here. No, but I think I really have it this time. This kid's got enough of the germ. That's very amusing to me. But then you get the most infamous and easily the most controversial character in this movie, Jar Jar Binks. Clearly the comic relief, but comic relief designed exclusively for kids. He's loud, he's frantic, he's clumsy, all the things that'll get kids hooting and hollering, but all the stuff that becomes grating to adults. As a result, a lot of people hated this character. He was considered incredibly annoying, over-the-top, childish. His function within the ensemble, as well as the fans' reaction to him, was like the Ewoks on overdrive. However, it's worth noting that Jar Jar is the only character here with any personality. He's the only one running around who isn't monotone or dull. He's got life to him, and sometimes that becomes a bright spot in the sea of monks sitting
I get
and
that,
chicks talking about nothing. The characters in this movie are very, very ill-defined, and it's not helped that they don't get any clever or fun interactions with one another. There's never really any bickering. Almost all of the dialogue in this movie is plot-focused. This is what we gotta do, and now we're gonna go do it. There's never any internalized thoughts, never anything deeper going on than that. What do these characters think of each other? What does Obi-Wan think of Anakin? What does Anakin think of Obi-Wan? I don't know. They barely interact. At the same time, the characters don't seem all that stressed about, well, anything, really. Everyone is very cool and collected. Whenever an action sequence is about to kick off, the characters will often reassure you and others that it's going to be just fine.
There's too many of them. We won't be opposed. The difficulty is getting into the throne room. Once we're inside, we shouldn't have a problem.
The thing is, they're often right. A lot of the action here is just Jedi cutting down the ineffective and weak battle droids. It doesn't take anything on their part to take them down. So while it does look cool when the Jedi swing around their lightsabers and cut down droids, I'm not all that invested, because things aren't all that exciting when they're easy. At the same time, once the movie takes a turn to Tatooine, it's discovered that the planet is run off of slave labor. Or at least Anakin and his mother Shmi are slaves of Watto. But that doesn't become the central focus of the movie. It makes you wonder, what could this movie be if it was about the liberation of Tatooine? Could that have been an effective story? Maybe. We'll never truly know.
I didn't actually come here to free slaves.
But the real kicker is the choices that characters make. On Tatooine, Qui-Gon gets wrapped up in a big gamble with Watto. Watto has the parts they need to get where they need to go. He claims to be the only person around who has those parts, and our heroes don't have the right currency to pay him. So, Qui-Gon bets the ship on Anakin winning a big pod race, and then eventually changes the bet slightly by adding Anakin's freedom to his wager. But why not try and find a currency exchange? There might be one of those around. Maybe check with other shops to see if someone else has the parts and is willing to exchange them for Republic credits. Maybe sell the ship and get a new one. Even if there was just one scene where our characters looked around a little bit more, found that Watto was the only one with these parts, that there was no other way, this would work so much better.
Yeah.
As it stands, it just feels like Qui-Gon got duped by the oldest sales trick in the book.
Yeah.
I know what it is as a T-59, but I promise you that.
Thankfully, once the pivotal pod race finally comes around, it is absolutely incredible. And that's in part because it's set up to be difficult. Characters are always talking about how it's scary. Shmi doesn't want Anakin to race. She thinks it's too dangerous. We reveal that Anakin's never actually finished a race. Qui-Gon's betting the farm. Sebulba is sabotaging everything. It could be better and use some more tact, but it's just enough to set up the stakes of the race and make it feel more intense. Then you get the sequence itself. A greatly riveting, technologically impressive sequence where all of these pods are racing at 500 miles an hour. They're blasting through. It's like the speeder chase in Return of the Jedi, but on a whole new level. The pods are moving at wicked speed, challenges and trials are hitting Anakin left and right, and the sound is fantastic. And as the scene builds to the climax, the music kicks in and raises the tension to peak levels right before Anakin's eventual victory. There are beats and reversals, an antagonist we want to see get defeated, and stakes behind it so we know that if things go wrong, they'll really go wrong. Which all leads to the final bit where in a moment of catharsis and satisfaction, Anakin finally bests Sebulba and wins the race. It's easily one of the biggest highlights of the movie, and the centerpiece of the entire thing.
Yeah.
Just like the music. Once again, John Williams killed it with the score. You got a handful of returning themes, some of them even given slightly new renditions. And then you have a bunch of new themes. There are new big action tracks that are fun and energetic. There are smaller character themes, like one for Qui-Gon, which is understated but used at just the right moments to be effective. Then there's Anakin's theme. A very light, very breezy theme, bustling with innocence. But as foreshadowing for the dark turn to come, the Imperial March is worked into it, further cementing that as Vader's theme, providing a hint towards Anakin's dark future. But before we get to Anakin's dark future, we also have to reveal that he built C-3PO. So, whenever C-3PO was saying thank the Maker in the originals, he was talking about Darth Vader. Not sure if that was a necessary detail, but whatever way to get R2 and 3PO into every
R2!
And all of this leads to the grand finale, which is even bigger than all of the other finales.
It is 8:46 right now.
Hope had one finale, Empire had two, Jedi had three, and now Phantom Menace has 4 simultaneous finales. It feels a little bit overwhelming. There are so many threads to keep track of, so much stuff going on that it's easy to miss something or lose track. On one side, Padme and the Naboo guards enter Theed Palace to try and capture Nute Gunray. This is probably the least interesting side. It's just guys shooting droids, a bit of grapple action, some slight trickery, and that's about it. Not much to it. There's a big army versus army clash between the Gungans and the battle droids, which is impressive on a technical level because no one had ever done anything that big in computers before. It was the first of its class. It does feel very tonally disconnected from the other finales though, since it is heavily leaning into Jar Jar's sense of humor and the crazy antics he and the other Gungans can get up to. But it does function fairly well on a story level. There are reversals, there are big pendulum swings. The Gungans at first have the upper hand with this big shield. The Trade Federation can't penetrate it, until they send in a bunch of droids and everything goes right to hell. So, despite the tonal inconsistency with the other finales, it provides a lot of clarity when it comes to the beats of the action. I also quite like those blue ball things that melt the droids. Those are fun. The most visually impressive finale comes with the space battle, as Anakin flies around the Trade Federation command ship to destroy it. The setup is kinda crazy though, because after Anakin's rejection by the Council, Qui-Gon decides it's a good idea to bring him to a war zone. Sounds very responsible. But once the action heats up, it's very exciting. The camera's finally moving again, soaring around the area. The effects are impressive, both CG and model work, which are used in tandem here. But it's also quite clear that this is trying to emulate the finale of A New Hope. Just like Luke, Anakin is here to destroy the villain's ultimate weapon and save the day. But don't just take it from me, take it from the man himself.
Instead of destroying the Death Star, he destroys the ship that controls the robots. And again, it's like poetry, so they rhyme. Every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one. Hopefully it'll work.
There's just one little thing. In A New Hope, the destruction of the Death Star, specifically hitting the exhaust port, is the entire point of the sequence. That was their plan from the get-go. We understand it before the sequence starts, we see a couple of runs before Luke finally makes his approach, and in a final moment, he makes a big character decision, Han Solo makes a startling comeback, and all of that comes through for the big moment of elation as the Death Star is finally destroyed. It's just working setups and payoffs the whole time, and everything comes together for the big bang. Conversely, here in The Phantom Menace, Anakin accidentally flies into the Trade Federation ship and in an attempt to escape, fires some torpedoes which happen to hit a key part of the command ship, causing a chain reaction that destroys it. It just doesn't hit as hard when every beat is presented as a happy accident. It's not about recapturing the moment in its entirety or about feeling like a kid again. It's about using the storytelling tricks, the art of setup and payoff to make the whole thing come to life. As it stands, it looks cool and the music definitely hits, but this explosion is not nearly as big of a deal as the Death Stars.
Now this is pod racing.
Kid's got a point on that one though, I've gotta give him that. But then comes the fourth and no doubt best side of the finale, the lightsaber duel. George Lucas promised that this movie would see the Jedi in their prime, fighting better than ever, and this sequence definitely delivers. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan are mounting up against Darth Maul, who wields a double-bladed lightsaber. I mean, the choreography is very stylized, but it's also fast and flashy. The three of them are constantly trying to outmatch each other. The actors are giving it their all, moving fast and with wicked speed. It is very funny watching them spin all the time, just giving their opponent ample opportunity to stab them in the back, but it's still fun. There are even good moments like Obi-Wan psyching out Maul briefly to distract him. However, there's nothing going on between the characters. I know there's the idea that this is ultimately the duel for the fate of Anakin. You know, whoever makes it out of this will ultimately train him. Will it be the father figure or the older brother figure? But that's not really on screen. Anakin and Obi-Wan only interact once before this, so I don't know if him becoming the master would be good or bad. And I don't know what any of the characters think of each other. What do Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan think about Darth Maul? They're interested that he's a Sith, but that's about it. That also means they should probably be going in to capture Maul and question him. But never do they inquire about where he's come from or what he's doing. They just fight. They don't have any emotional reason to take Maul down. So I, as an audience member, have no reason to care beyond the fact that I like seeing the lightsabers fly around. Thankfully, things do finally heat up once the battle takes one tragic turn. Now there is something here between the characters. Darth Maul just killed Qui-Gon, and Obi-Wan is pissed. Suddenly, when the fight starts again, you feel the intensity so much more. It feels so much more personal. It happens right at the end, but once the personal aspect is added to the scene, it becomes far more engaging, and ultimately leads to Obi-Wan getting the upper hand and defeating Maul once and for all.
You bitch!
Good work, Obi-Wan. Unfortunately, Qui-Gon's dead, though, so I guess Anakin's
Why did
gonna
they
be
say
trained
like
with
that?
older brother figure, not father figure. Sad. Ultimately, Naboo is freed from the Trade Federation. Valorum gets the boot as Palpatine succeeds him to become Chancellor, one step closer to his ultimate reign. And now, Obi-Wan is going to train Anakin as a promise to Qui-Gon. The Jedi Council turned around on that, by the way. They decided Anakin should be trained. Would have been cool to see that decision get made, but that's alright. And ultimately, the whole thing closes out with a big celebration sequence. Both sides of Naboo, the surface strollers and the Gungans sign a treaty for peace. And the movie closes out like all the others with an iris white. Man, that wasn't as good as the others, was it? The Phantom Menace presents a lot of interesting ideas, lots of technical innovations and upgrades with some of the most impressive effects for the time. It's a movie that I have a great time thinking about and parsing its ideas, but whenever I have it actually playing in front of me, I'm bored. I admire its ambition and ideas more than I enjoy actually watching it. Video footage from initial reactions, however, told a different story. People walking out of the theater were totally jazzed about the whole thing.
Fantastic. Go see it as quick as you can.
It was better than the other one.
I think the lightsaber battle's really great.
It was good, dude. It was really good.
So worth it. So worth it.
There was praise for the action and spectacle. Everyone was generally riding off the high of a new Star Wars movie in theaters and the action-packed finale. And the box office reception did not disappoint. Phantom Menace stormed into the market, raging across the summer of 1999 as the biggest movie of the year, raking in $431 million domestically and $924 million
Shit.
becoming the most successful Star Wars movie ever.
Not for
on
real. That
Just
bitch
for
almost
Free.
made a
The
bill.
second most successful movie of all time, trailing ever so slightly behind Titanic. But unlike the other movies, as time went on, reactions took a big shift. While the loud, immediate outcry was positive, over time dissenting voices began to ring louder and louder. People began to voice their larger flaws with the movie. They didn't care as much about the characters. They felt the movie was boring and uninteresting, and famously, they didn't like Jar Jar. When the original movies came out, and especially when the re-releases happened in 1997, screenings were met with cheers, applause, and laughter at every turn. But with Phantom Menace in theaters, screenings were dead silent.
Type shit.
No one
I
really
ain't gonna
said
lie.
anything
I
about
ain't
the movies
gonna lie. I ain't gonna lie. When I went to go see that bitch, when they got back into theaters, I went and got that fucking popcorn bucket and shit, bruh. It was like everybody was focused or either just so bored out their mind. Like seriously, bro. I thought it was just me, and I watched this movie before, like on Disney Plus and shit. Probably watched it before as a kid, but didn't remember it all. But when I watched it on Disney Plus, I was basically just watching it to get a lesson. You feel me? Just to get the history of how shit came to the original trilogy. That's it. Real talk. Did they have good pieces in there? Of course. It wasn't just about Darth Maul. It wasn't just about seeing how Anakin started off and shit. Like it was good. It was good. That's why I don't think that I really don't think that that the first movie, episode 1, I don't think that it was worser than episode 2. I ain't gonna lie, episode 2 was completely boring. But it gave us Anakin's first step of turning to the dark side completely. Like, very first step. Killing them fucking Tusken Raiders, nigga, I wish they would have showed it. Ooh, I wish they would have showed it.
And to be fair, reviews were a bit more mixed initially. Some critics had fun with the movie, but others were a lot more negative about it. There were even some big questions like, is this movie racist?
Definitely.
Notable perceived stereotypes here. Jar Jar is obviously a black stereotype, Watto is a Jewish stereotype, and the Nemoidians are Asian stereotypes.
Yep.
Was that intentional? I don't know. Was
Nope.
it unflattering? Probably.
Yep.
Phantom Menace represented a cultural shift, especially among Star Wars fans. Never before had a movie been so hyped up and ultimately so disappointing. This became a cautionary tale. This movie was just proof of the fact that making movies is incredibly hard, and to put that pressure entirely on one person is probably too much. The original movie succeeded not just because George Lucas had a fantastic idea, but because of all of the people who surrounded him, who challenged some of his ideas to make them even better. Because George Lucas, despite all of his talent, isn't perfect. No filmmaker is. They all have different skill sets that are complemented by the people they work with who have different skill sets. But this time, whether intentional or not, George Lucas ultimately surrounded himself with yes men. A bunch of people who wouldn't challenge his ideas because they felt there was no need to. He's George Lucas. He made Star Wars. But Star Wars wasn't a movie that could be made by one person. It took a team of incredibly talented artists to bring it to life. And while there are talented artists, designers, animators, and all of that for The Phantom Menace, this movie feels so much more singular. This is George Lucas's movie from top to bottom, with all of the pros and all of the cons. And as a result, the overall fan sentiment of the fans know better than the creator became so much louder. It was pretty fringe before, but now it was seemingly an undisputed fact, which ultimately fed into the darker corners of the fandom, as disappointment inevitably turned to anger. Fans began chiding Lucas, even attacking some of the actors involved, namely Ahmed Best and Jake Lloyd. Both of them were hit incredibly hard by hatred and vitriol from Star Wars fans, and both had to reconcile with the reactions in extremely dark ways. Jake Lloyd renounced his fandom, and Ahmed Best almost took his own life. Thankfully, both of them have recovered. They've both managed to bounce back, and I genuinely wish nothing but the best for them. But it's no secret that they were getting the absolute worst reaction from Star Wars fans. It was no doubt demoralizing for the cast and crew behind the scenes.
Because I heard that Jake Lloyd really was really down about that shit, and I know Ahmed Best was getting like criticism and shit, but I didn't know he almost committed suicide. That's crazy.
To artists, designers, animators, and all of that for The Phantom Menace, this movie feels so much more singular. This is George Lucas's movie from top to bottom, with all of the pros and all of the cons. And as a result, the overall fan sentiment of the fans know better than the creator became so much louder. It was pretty fringe before, but now it was seemingly an undisputed fact, which ultimately fed into the darker corners of the fandom, as disappointment inevitably turned to anger. Fans began chiding Lucas, even attacking some of the actors involved, namely Ahmed Best and Jake Lloyd. Both of them were hit incredibly hard by hatred and vitriol from Star Wars fans, and both had to reconcile with the reactions in extremely dark ways. Jake Lloyd renounced his fandom, and Ahmed Best almost took his own life. Thankfully, both of them have recovered. They've both managed to bounce back, and I genuinely wish nothing but the best for them. But it's no secret that they were hit with the absolute worst reaction from Star Wars fans. It was no doubt demoralizing for the cast and crew behind the scenes to see the movie taken this way, to see fans slowly rejecting it over time. Inevitably, the question was raised among the audience, could the next two movies salvage this? Was the whole trilogy a wash? But let's try and not be pessimistic. Maybe Phantom Menace was a fluke accident. It was George Lucas regaining his footing and tripping a bit along the way. You know, it was the first time he had directed a movie since the 1977 original. There are growing pains. Maybe now, with this movie out in theaters, the next two can pick up the pieces and really bring this thing together. After all, kids were still enjoying the movie, and at the end of the day, maybe that's all that matters. For now, fans grappled with their complicated thoughts coming out of The Phantom Menace as they looked to the future, hopeful that Episode 2 would stick the landing. In the months following The Phantom Menace's release, a very curious thing happened. Despite the immense scale of the movie's promotional takeover and the huge amount of toys that were sold in 1999, the sales actually wound up dropping off pretty significantly after only a few months. Now, you could attribute this at least in part to the movie's mixed to negative reception, but the bigger contributor is that everything surrounding Phantom Menace was totally over-licensed. They made so many toys, so many pieces of merch, that there was no way they'd all be able to sell. There was a ton of demand, but way more supply. And so,
that's crazy.
Alone made
Pizza Hut
$500 million
had
toys. Toy sales.
Taco Bell and KFC had toys. Like, what the fuck? Well, I know about KFC having toys.
As for the promotional
Taco Bell
going
having
into
toys?
episodes 2 and 3, things would be scaled down so the market wasn't overloaded. It would be saturated for sure, but it wouldn't be oversaturated. Home video sales for Phantom Menace were fantastic, however. In April of 2000, the movie made its way to VHS, selling a whopping 100 million copies in its first 2 days. And the movie was nominated for 3 Academy Awards: Best Sound Effects Editing, Best Sound, which are different somehow, and Best Visual Effects. It did wind up losing all 3 awards to The Matrix, but it was still a worthy achievement. On a technical level, Phantom Menace had plenty going for it, and this was recognition on the biggest stage. But now, with the Phantom Menace cycle dying down and people moving on either in hope or disappointment, the time had come for the people at Lucasfilm to begin Episode 2. The middle chapter to the new trilogy was now underway. The Empire Strikes Back for the new generation. Designs pretty much.
Oh yeah, and episode 2 introduced the fucking clone trooper.
The design director
Like,
on the project, leading the
it
team
was
to
a
create
boring
bunch
ass
of new
movie,
things
but
for this new movie.
besides the
Particularly,
plot
this
and the
movie would
story,
start to bridge the gap between the rounded and
so
serene
good.
Phantom Menace designs and the more industrial designs from the original trilogy. There was a clear idea that technology would slowly morph to become what it was in the originals, and this was the first step in seeing the transition, with certain ideas and shapes coming directly from the original trilogy, all the while still being a natural continuation of where Episode 1 left off. At the same time, Episode 2 made a very big technological leap during its pre-production. As the ideas started to come together for the next story, most of the inbound sequences would be designed not with storyboards, but with 3D computer animatics. For the first time, most of a feature film would be pre-visualized in the computer. Previs existed in various forms for the other movies, whether it be using World War II footage for the end of the original movie, filming small models for the speeder chase in Return of the Jedi, or even the computer previs used for the pod race in Episode 1. But this was going to be a big leap, with most of Episode 2 designed and sculpted in the computer, to create a sense of momentum within the shots, create complex camera movements, and even get a sense of the pace of the edit. Also that once they were on set, the sequence had mostly been created, and they could put it together much faster on the day. The big previs section of the movie, which completely bypassed storyboards, was the grand finale. Episode 2 was going to feature a greatly exciting sequence for the larger universe. As originally mentioned in the very first movie, this one would finally give a concrete look at the Clone Wars. Armies versus armies in a grand scale finale bigger than any of the other movies. And the previs process was huge, creating all sorts of never-before-seen images that would then be fully animated by ILM to form even more breathtaking shots that would hopefully blow audiences away. On the downside, however, a lot of the team was a tiny bit rudderless during pre-production. So many elements of the movie were being developed with blinders on. Things were being designed and sculpted based on almost nothing. And that's because developments on the script were slow going. Following the backlash to The Phantom Menace, George Lucas didn't know if he wanted to return to the writer's desk for the second movie. The wind had been taken out of his sails. But over time, he slowly realized that he did want to continue the journey, that he did want to be at the desk penning the next script. And by March of 2000, the first rough draft was created, which would eventually evolve into a proper first and second draft. But Lucas would not be alone at the writer's desk this time, because he also brought in Jonathan Hales to help write the third draft. He, of course, had worked with Lucas before on the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. Together, the two of them would work day and night to refine the script to the best shape it could do. And eventually, the production teams had something tangible and real to work off of, even though it arrived very late in the day. In fact, the shooting script was completed just 3 days before cameras were set to roll. But before filming could commence, there was one big part of the process that needed addressing, and that's casting. Plenty of actors from Episode 1 would come back. Ewan McGregor, Natalie Portman, Ian McDermott, Samuel L. Jackson, and of course the legacy actors Anthony Daniels, Kenny Baker, and Frank Oz. But Episode 2 would also feature a handful of new faces as new characters. Tamura Morrison joined as the bounty hunter Jango Fett, the father of Boba Fett from the originals. Legendary actor Sir Christopher Lee joined as the new villain Count Dooku.
Yes!
He, of course, was returning to big spectacle blockbusters at this time, also starring as Sauron in the currently filming Lord of the Rings trilogy. And his good friend Peter Cushing was in the very first Star Wars movie. So he stepped into this role to, in a way, join his friend in the Star Wars universe, and also have a ton of fun in this big fantasy epic production. Then, of course, you had the most significant role in this movie, a role that wasn't exactly new, but did need a new face, Anakin Skywalker. Episode 2 was going to take place quite some time after the first, so Anakin was going to grow up from being a kid to being a young adult, and a whole legion of actors were tested for the role, to take Anakin into the next step on the tragic path to becoming Darth Vader. You had Charlie Hunnam, Topher Grace, Joshua Jackson, Eric Christian Olsen, Paul Walker, even Leonardo DiCaprio was considered. But he declined since he didn't want to take that big of a leap just yet. And so the role ultimately went to Canada's own Hayden Christensen, because the entire team behind the casting believed that he could portray both the anger and the innocence of the character very well. Perfect for this transitory portion of his story. And so, with the cast new and returning assembled, it was time to begin principal photography on June 26, 2000, where for the first time in the series, production would not primarily take place in England. Instead, production took place in Fox Studios in Sydney, Australia. And this time, taking a bit of a pot shot towards the reaction to the last movie, the working title for episode 2 on set was Jar Jar's Big Adventure. Now that's fun. And this came with yet another huge technological advancement, because this became one of the very first feature films to shoot exclusively with digital cameras. George Lucas, of course, wanted to shoot digitally on Phantom Menace, but the cameras weren't going to be ready in time. But this time, things were finally in place. Sony was already developing a digital camera and worked with Lucas to create a version that could shoot HD at 24 frames per second, matching the frame rate of film. There were some challenges, however. Digital cameras needed a bunch of cables, the camera itself is very big, and new lenses needed to be designed to feed light to the much smaller sensor. Panavision ultimately created the first set of compatible lenses, which in some ways had to be even better than film lenses since they were focusing light down to a smaller point within the camera. This was also a very controversial move, with plenty of outspoken people within the industry, especially those at the American Cinematographer magazine, criticizing the choice. They of course loved film and all of its advantages, and didn't think digital would be up to snuff. But George Lucas was out to prove them wrong, and prove that digital cinema was the way of the future. This was episode 2's big advancement in George Lucas's quest to make filmmaking easier. When shooting on film, you'd have to wait an entire day, if not more, for the film to come back fully processed. You had to wait at least 24 hours before you could start playing with it in the edit. But with digital, it could be downloaded and logged right away, and an editor could start working on it within just 1 hour. So if something was wrong with the footage, you could see it pretty much right away, and be able to fix it right there on the day. This movie also filmed significantly more against blue screens. Actors would admit that most, if not every single set, had some kind of blue screen effect. They were almost constantly looking at things that weren't there, that didn't exist, which can be a very big challenge for anyone. It made it so that George Lucas was no longer capturing an entire image in one go, he was really capturing an element of a final shot. More elements would ultimately be added later that could all be moved around in the computer to create the perfect shot that he wanted. Now, there was some location filming conducted for episode 2, but significantly less. The crew spent 1 week in London at the Plaza de España, they spent about 1 week in Italy filming some grand romantic scenes, and they spent a little over a week once again in Tunisia, returning to Tatooine. In fact, they were going right back to the old homestead from episode 4, which was very nostalgic and very surreal for anyone that was also involved in the original production like George Lucas and Anthony Daniels. But they didn't just film for episode 2 here, because they took the opportunity to film just one shot for episode 3. Why come back and rebuild everything in 3 years when you already know what you need and how to accomplish it?
Not for
But
real.
what was the shot? That was being kept under lock and key. People didn't know what the episode 2 story was going to be, let alone episode 3. Come on. Ultimately, principal photography came to a close on
I'm really trying to
September
think,
20,
why did they go back to
2000, bringing to
Tatooine
an end the
episode 3?
entire 3-month period of shooting. Now it was time for
Oh, I
post-production
know why.
to enter
Never
its
mind,
full
never
stride
mind,
going
never
into
mind,
the
never
year
mind.
2001. Like The Phantom Menace before, episode 2 was going to go through a nearly 2-year
If I'm guessing correctly, it was at the end of the movie.
animating all of the immense visual effects that had never before been attempted. The people working on episode 2 noted that the effects on episode 1 were child's play by comparison. Editing was once again conducted by Ben Burtt, who ran solo this time, once again doing plenty of editing within the frame thanks to the separation of each element during filming. He was also once again the sound designer on the movie, working with supervising sound editor Matthew Wood and a whole team of sound artists and engineers to create even more incredible sounds for this new movie. From recording airplanes and vehicles to tiny little knickknacks you'd find lying around. There was plenty worked in to continue Star Wars' penchant for having absolutely unbelievable sound at every corner. Eventually, like The Phantom Menace before it, episode 2 also went into a brief period of reshoots, once again built into the sizable $115 million budget, and based off of the initial rough cut Lucas had seen. One of the key things was that Lucas noted the pace of the movie was lagging before the final act. so a whole new action sequence was added in record time. A sequence set inside of a droid factory, with characters running across
Why is it
conveyor
popping
belts
up?
trying to avoid
If
crushed
whatever.
working machinery. The sequence was conceived very quickly, and it was shot even faster, with the actors in front of blue screens filming every live-action element in under 5 hours. After that, previs animators would try to use the footage and piece it together to create a sequence after the fact, which would then feed into ILM's visual effects pipeline, creating the sequence as it would ultimately appear. The visual effects pipeline for this movie was also significantly bigger than it was for Episode 1, continuing the huge advancements that Phantom Menace had made to push the movie into the digital stratosphere. Every background would be replaced, there were tons more creatures, vehicles, practically everything was 10 times bigger than it was before. However, technology still wasn't at a place where CG environments could overtake real miniature model work. Making a model was still faster and more cost-effective than creating a digital environment. While there would be some digital environments, so much of the rest of the movie was still completed with incredible miniatures that had served as backgrounds for the movie's extensive blue screen use. But there was one big leap for Episode 2's visual effects that would take it leagues beyond, and that was the amount of entirely digital characters that had appeared throughout the movie. In Episode 1, you really only had Jar Jar in a starring role, with occasional other characters coming in as well for a couple dozen shots. But now, digital characters are going to be everywhere. Kaminoans, Geonosians, Dexter Jetster, and the biggest of all, Yoda. In all of the other movies, Yoda was a puppet, manned by the one and only Frank Oz. But this time, he was going to be created entirely in CG. They even did a brief CG test in Phantom Menace to see if this was even a proper road to go down in the future. Of course, they decided that yes, Yoda would be entirely CGI in Episode 2. But despite that, the animators and artists went to great pains to make him look as much like the puppet as possible. They wanted to follow Frank Oz's influence and the way he controlled Yoda as much as possible, so that the transition between CG Yoda here was seamless with puppet Yoda in the originals. All the while using the freedom CG gave them to have Yoda do things he'd never been able to do before, which was hopefully going to be a great joy to fans around the world. In some
And
ways,
it was.
post-production on Episode 2 was even more laborious than it was on Episode 1, with further technical achievements and advancements made at every step along the way. But with the May 2002 release date beginning to draw closer, it was time for Lucasfilm to begin to drip-feed audiences just a little bit about the next installment, which all began on August 7th, 2001. When after years of speculation, the title for Episode 2 was finally announced as Attack of the Clones. Response to this was still mixed. Just like the reactions to the Phantom Menace title, plenty were apprehensive to the reveal, perhaps even more so considering the still fresh reaction to the last movie as a whole. Famously, even Ewan McGregor was a little puzzled by the title when he learned it on camera.
I just heard the new Star Wars film's called Attack of the Clones. No. It is. It's not better than Phantom Menace, I don't know.
But on the flip side, others pointed out its campy 50s B-movie influences. Attack of the Clones honestly sounds cut from the same cloth as The Empire Strikes Back. It sounds more Star Wars than Phantom Menace did, and it also told audiences definitively that they would see the Clone Wars on the big screen for the very first time. On the small screen, the first movie of this new trilogy made a comeback, with The Phantom Menace released on DVD on October 16, 2001, joined by a second disc with incredibly candid behind-the-scenes featurettes, as well as a slightly extended runtime for the movie itself, featuring little added bits for the pod race in the middle of the movie. And the DVD sales were nothing to complain about. Despite it being a relatively new medium that people were still slowly transitioning to, Phantom Menace sold 2.2 million copies in its first week, which was enormous, and allowed people to get caught up on this new trilogy just in time for promotional efforts to really kick off for Attack of the Clones. Because finally, in November of 2001, Attack of the Clones really began its marketing presence, starting with this teaser poster, revealing the conceit of Anakin and Padme's relationship, which then expanded to the release of not one, not two, but 3 teaser trailers across the month. The first one premiered in theaters in front of Monsters, Inc. on November 2nd, and it was by every definition of the word, a teaser. With almost no music, this teaser is simply set to the haunting breaths of Darth Vader, with various cryptic shots of characters, location, and effects scattered around. There wasn't much to glean from this, but thankfully it wouldn't be alone. On November 5th, releasing online, the second teaser revealed more about the character dynamics, more visuals, and even some of the humor Episode 2 promised to have.
I decided to come and rescue you.
Good job.
But these were only preludes to the main event, because on November 16th, playing in theaters before Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, a third and final teaser clocking in at 2 minutes finally released. And this one went all in on the romantic subplot between Anakin and Padme, promising that it would be completely central to the upcoming movie's story. But eventually, the teaser expanded a bit further with a montage of action and spectacle that showed that there was even more hiding behind it than just the romance. Some were inevitably still riding off the stink of Episode 1, but others were incredibly excited and hopeful for Episode 2. Big story events were on their way, big ideas were going to hit theaters, and if for nothing else, it was still going to provide incredible visuals that no other movie was even attempting to offer.
It is
No matter what
9/20,
people's
9/20.
expectations were, there were a lot of eyes on May 16th, 2002. Star Wars Episode 2 was on its way, and people were gearing up for its inevitable debut. Across the first months of 2002, the last stretch of post-production for Attack of the Clones took off. Visual effects were coming down to the wire, with individual shots tweaked until the very last possible moment. George Lucas's ability to iterate on shots and make adjustments was both a blessing and a curse, because it meant you could change things infinitely. Of course, you can't. The movie's gotta come out at some point, leading to the phrase,
Films are not released, they escape.
a mantra certainly not coined by the team behind this movie, but absolutely one used by people behind the scenes to describe the last push towards the movie's release, especially during one pivotal shot of Yoda, which was changed and adjusted several times up to the last possible minute. At the same time, the final mix was conducted in the last months, combining everything the sound team had done into one final mix to create the latest Star Wars soundscape that would hopefully wow audiences all over the world. The work was going at full speed ahead towards the May debut, with every team member behind the scenes working tirelessly to make Episode 2 the absolute best movie it could be. And in the final push, promotional efforts took off for Attack of the Clones. On March 10th, 2002, the full theatrical trailer for Episode 2 was aired on the Fox network between Malcolm in the Middle and The X-Files, and was later premiered in movie theaters on March 15th before the movie Ice Age, giving fans the latest great look at the middle chapter in this prequel trilogy.
I will not let this republic be split in two. My negotiations will not fail.
If they do, there aren't enough Jedi to protect the Republic. We're keeping for the peace, not soldiers.
This trailer presents an abridged version of the upcoming film's storyline, teasing the anger within Anakin, an investigative story with Obi-Wan, and especially the creation of a grand army for the Republic, providing audiences with their first good look at the titular clone army and the inbound start of the Clone Wars. It was big, exciting, and leaned a lot more into the humor and adventure, which some believe was missing from Episode 1. And with this trailer's release, excitement for Attack of the Clones hit a fever pitch as everything geared up for the movie's ultimate release.
Begun this Clone War.
In the last push, following in the footsteps of Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones took over promotion. While it wasn't as overwhelming as it was last time, it was certainly hard to miss. On one hand, you had the theatrical poster, featuring incredible artwork by Drew Struzan, absolutely fitting in with the larger saga's poster game so far. TV spots hit the airwaves, getting TV audiences aware of the inbound release, and there was even a brief teaser showing in theaters just a few weeks before Episode 2's release. This time showing the incredibly exciting reveal, Yoda with a lightsaber. Toys once
Yeah,
again took
that
over
would have got me
with
hyped
new
too.
images and
I ain't gonna
shows
lie.
and new characters set to appear
That
all
would have got me
over its
hyped for
active
sure.
movies. Video games were also created in conjunction with the movie's release. One would release before the movie, a straight Episode 2 adaptation for the Game Boy Advance. But later in the year, it'd be joined with Jedi Starfighter, the new Droid Army, the Clone Wars, and Star Wars Bounty Hunter, which would allow fans to engage with the universe in all new ways once they hit shelves in November and December of 2002. Before that, in direct tandem with Episode 2's hype cycle, the second ever Star Wars celebration was held in Indianapolis, Indiana. From May 3rd to May 5th, over 27,000 Star Wars fans took to the convention to share in the collective love of Star Wars and the collective excitement for Episode 2. And finally, the movie made its first premiere at the Tribeca Film Festival. The first ever Tribeca Film Festival, actually. It premiered not long after out of competition at the Cannes Film Festival, with plenty of other premieres held across the US and Canada, each raising money for local and large-scale charities, giving back to the communities. Once again, the press cycle for Episode 2 was insane. Despite the backlash to Episode 1, there was no denying the excitement around further Star Wars movies. People once again turned up in droves, dressed up in iconic original trilogy or even prequel trilogy costumes, and got ready to re-enter the universe once again, all under the hope that this one would be better than the last. Or, for those that already enjoyed Episode 1, they were excited to see the narrative continue into Episode 2. The time had finally come. After 3 years since the most pivotal shift in the Star Wars franchise, the middle chapter of the prequel trilogy had arrived. The clock had now turned to May 16th, 2002. So grab your tickets, grab some popcorn, and have a seat, because it's now time for the beginning of the Clone Wars. All of the other Star Wars movies have opened the same way. Once the crawl ends, they tilt down through the stars towards the subject of the first shot. In this movie, however, once the crawl is over, the camera tilts up. So, that's cool. The story this time, as introduced by the opening crawl, is that a group of separatists led by Count Dooku have been breaking free from the Republic. They've been trying to raise an army to overwhelm the limited Jedi forces and ultimately overthrow the Republic to take it down. So, movements are being made within the Republic to create a grand army to fight back, leading to a potential war. Meanwhile, someone is trying to assassinate Senator Padme Amidala. Obi-Wan is sent on an investigation to find out who, and Anakin is sent to Naboo with Padme to protect her. And from here, the story takes off, with each side developing in their own direction. The question is this movie better than The Phantom Menace? Depends on who you ask. Mileage will vary, but if you're asking me, I think it's about the same. Once again, the movie presents a legion of good ideas, with tons of stuff to parse through and make sense of in conversations after the fact.
Yeah.
But it's still not as entertaining to actually sit down and watch.
Exactly.
For whatever reason, Anakin and Obi-Wan are separated again during this movie. This is really the big opportunity for them to grow their bond before the ultimate falling out, especially since they hardly interacted in the last one. But now they hardly interact in this one, and whenever they do, they're constantly snapping at each other. These two guys hate each other pretty much the whole time, which seems to contradict how this dynamic was established back in the originals.
He was a good friend.
The only time they don't hate each other is this brief scene in an elevator where they talk about adventures that happened off-screen. Fun, bonding adventures that could have been cool to see to dramatize their dynamic, but instead they just talk about it and that's about it.
Yeah.
It's a shame because both actors are good and are doing the best they can with what they're given, but they're rarely given a chance to be good together. And I think that's partly what's missing here. This movie is trying to be funnier, though.
That's why they made the
There were some
cartoon.
moments of humor in the last one. They almost always fell flat, but this one is a little more successful in its efforts. I mean, we have some little references and nods to the original movies. There's a brief Ahmed Best and Anthony Daniels cameo in a nightclub early on, and there's this bit.
You want to buy some death sticks?
I want to sell the death sticks.
I don't want to sell you death sticks.
You want to go home and rethink your life.
I want to go home and rethink my life.
Some of the action here is fun. There's a brief sequence set in the rain that has some good moments littered throughout. And on a technical level, there are plenty of good things in this movie. The sound is once again fantastic, with ships, lightsabers, blasters, everything going off at full force during the entire runtime. There are even some new sounds like the endlessly iconic seismic charge, which is great not just because of the sound it makes when it blows, but the absence of sound just before it blows. I could hear that thing go off all day. Shame it only happens twice in this movie. That stuff's awesome. And like always, the music is fantastic. John Williams once again comes in with a fantastic soundtrack, but it's worth noting that there aren't as many new themes this time. John Williams was pretty busy in 2002, with his efforts stretched between this, the second Harry Potter movie, Minority Report, and Catch Me If You Can. So it's not surprising that a lot of this music is reused from Phantom Menace. But the new music that is here is great. I personally really like the Camino theme. It has a perfect amount of mystery and edge to it. It's very good. And once again, the visual effects are very impressive. Things are once again revolutionary for the film industry, with tons of advancements specifically for digital characters, like Dexter Jetster, owner of a 50s bar on Coruscant. Jar Jar is back, although because of the backlash to the last movie, his role here is significantly smaller. That doesn't stop him from looking into the camera at one point, though, as a direct message to everyone who hated him last time. He's just like, oh, you hate me? Well, I'm still here. Suck it, losers.
Yeah!
And then, of course, the most talked about CG character here is obviously Yoda. For the first time, Yoda was an entirely CG effect interlaced with live-action actors. And it's definitely an achievement technologically. It's proof that something like that could work. His face can emote, he can do things the puppet probably couldn't, but that puppet still looks amazing. And this doesn't quite look as good as that. This is fantastic as a novelty, as a proof of concept for digital characters, but some of the charm of the original puppet is definitely lost. There's another thing that's lost a little bit with this movie overall. It's lost all the dirt and scratches you so commonly find on film. Because this movie was the first big blockbuster to shoot entirely on digital, it's a bit too clean. Now, it's down to personal preference, but I think film grain and film shake, all that kind of stuff, adds to the charm of movies. These imperfections make things visually that much more interesting. But this movie looks flawless, which in itself is a flaw. There's a digital sheen over everything. Everything feels flatter and less interesting to look at. There are also limitations to the excessive use of blue screens. You can often see the separation between the actors and the background.
Just a bit, yeah.
The actors are also more often than not reacting to nothing, which they can sometimes pull off, like when Obi-Wan meets up with Dexter Jetster and he's genuinely happy about that. But other times it feels like their reaction should be 10 times amplified.
Very impressive.
You sound a little bored saying that, good sir. I mean, are you seeing this? No, he's seeing this. I mean, he might have been given some concept art and different pieces that told him what he was looking at, but it's still a challenge to emote and feel awe against something that's not there. And then, of course, you have an aspect to this movie that bothers me specifically to no end: digital zooms. They appeared very sparingly in the first movie, but now they're all over this one. Digital zooms are when the people behind the scenes take an otherwise static shot, realize it needs a bit more energy, and decide to push in with keyframes in the edit. This is obviously something people will do with home movies or smaller productions all the time, and in those contexts it's perfectly fine. But on a $115 million movie like this, it looks bad. I don't like it. This kind of zoom does not behave the way actual zoom or actual camera movement does. The foreground elements are not separated from the background, so there's no parallax, something that would happen if the camera was moving, and the depth of field isn't changing, which would happen if a lens was actually zooming. Zooming in with a lens is just the act of moving the glass within it, which reshapes the light heading into the film, or in this case, the sensor. light changes when you zoom, but since this zoom is created entirely in post, it just looks like a still image that's being made bigger on the screen.
Type
It's
shit,
distracting
yeah,
every
I
time.
see, yeah.
The reliance on blue screen this time and the attempts to make filmmaking easier really catch up with the filmmakers here. When locked on a set, and not even a set, a big blue room, the camera can only move so much. And it's also possible, though speculative, that they were incentivized not to move the camera too much or else they wouldn't be able to track the backgrounds later. Now the reason I say that's speculative is because this is just how George Lucas shoots things, and has been shooting things his entire career. But the filmmaking practice of creating every single shot out of layers means the whole thing is essentially created in post, and they don't realize they need a camera movement until months after they're done shooting, which is why the digital zooms happen. But it also means that once the fully CG sequences take over, the camera is suddenly moving a whole hell of a lot more. Once the camera is no longer tied to physical limitations, it goes anywhere and everywhere, which creates a weird split in visual styles for this movie. It feels like the CG sequences are directed by someone else, because they are. George Lucas often let the previous animators just do their thing with the entirely CG sequences, with the only mandate being make it look cool. Even John Knoll kind of became a bit of a director for the visual effects on these sequences, and all of these people shoot things very differently than George Lucas does. Whenever Lucas takes over on set, the camera's locked down on a tripod or something. But once the CG takes over, like in the opening speeder chase, we're soaring around doing wild things at every turn.
Come on!
It's a very weird separation that is really caused by the ease of not having to physically move a camera in a CG environment, so it can do crazier and crazier things. Then, of course, we get into the real meat and potatoes of this movie, the story. And it feels very much like a first draft. First drafts are incredibly important to the writing process. They're the first time a whole movie story is seen on the page in its complete form. But then comes the second, third, fourth, however many drafts after that to smooth over, condense, simplify, and expand on certain things that need it. But it doesn't really feel like that happened here. So there are a lot of ridiculous things in this story. Like Newt Gunray hiring Dooku, who hires Jango Fett, who hires Zam Wesell, who hires a robot, who hires worms to try and kill Padme. Worst assassination attempt in history right there. Then there's the fact that Padme isn't the queen anymore, which is strange because I thought they were making her the queen in the last movie because she's said to be Princess Leia's mother, and the mother of the princess is the queen. But here she's just a senator, so I guess they dropped that part. Also, I guess Naboo elects its queens, and they only serve for 2 terms? They also elect when the queen's only like 14? What's happening over on Naboo? Are they child traffickers too? It's worth noting, though, that of George Lucas's many talents, he has a fantastic story sense. He knows how point A can lead to point B can lead to point C. He knows that this trilogy is ultimately about Palpatine's slow acquisition of power, and that starts with him manipulating events to become Chancellor in Episode 1. He also knows that if you separate a kid from his mother at age 9, that's going to lead to some internal issues later on. And it's even played up here when Anakin finally reunites with his mother after 10 years away, only for her to die in his arms. It's one of the few genuinely affecting moments in this movie. It's played really well. All of the issues, however, come in the execution. Anakin reuniting with his mother only for her to die is a solid idea, and the moment it happens is good, but the route to get there is convoluted and very weird. This movie introduces young Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru, and for whatever reason, it decides to take a complicated route to explain how exactly they're related to Anakin so they can be Luke's actual aunt and uncle in Episode 4. Apparently, Owen's father, Klieg Lars, bought Shmi Skywalker off of Watto and then married her, making Owen Lars the stepson of Shmi and stepbrother of Anakin. But that's really weird, man. I mean, you fall in love with a person and decide to purchase her? That's weird. It also doesn't help that we never get to see true love happen, or understand that maybe there are other things at play here. We're only told about it after the fact. Which brings me to a fairly damning question. Did the filmmakers forget about Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru? Obviously they remembered them in time for Episode 2, but did they forget when making Episode 1? It feels like they might have. There doesn't need to be a biological or even marriage level connection for them to be Luke's aunt and uncle in the original. they can just be family friends. But if they were just going to be family friends, they would have probably needed to be introduced in the first movie when we're also introduced to Shmi and Anakin. And since that was never in the first movie, it tells me they might have forgotten to put it in there and had to figure out a convoluted way to work them into the story so things lined up. Either that or this was the plan the entire time, in which case, that's a very weird plan. It is very funny, though, that these guys own C-3PO, who has skin now, by the way, because it means that when Uncle Owen bought 3PO in the original, he was buying a droid he already owned 20 years earlier. Maybe he got senile and forgot, but it's really fun.
It seems that he is carrying a message from everyone in the Navy.
And then comes the love story. Because Attack of the Clones, more than anything else, is a romance movie. And again, from a zoomed-out story perspective, everything makes sense. The Jedi forbid attachments, they have a celibacy law and stuff like that. Can't lose what you don't care about. But Anakin falls in love with Padme regardless, which will of course cause a divide between him and the Council in time for Episode 3. This is fine. Forbidden love that adds to Anakin's eventual turn? That makes sense. But unfortunately, given what's in the movie, I have no reason to believe that these two characters would ever actually fall in love. Anakin falling for Padme? That makes total sense. He's a straight guy, and she's Natalie Portman. That's a two-piece jigsaw puzzle if ever there was one. But Padme falling for Anakin? I don't see it. Because outside of a nice dinner and some frolicking in the grass, Anakin does everything wrong.
Literally.
Let's go through a checklist real quick. Things to not do on a date with Anakin Skywalker. Don't argue with your boss in front of her.
Not go through this exercise again, Anakin. And you will pay attention to my lead. Why? What?
Don't complain about your boss like a child the moment he leaves the room.
He's overly critical. He never listens. He doesn't understand. It's not fair.
Don't look at her like that.
It makes me feel
Cyberman.
Don't tell her you dream about her. Often.
Exactly the way I put me on my dreams.
Shit.
Don't interrupt your date during her important business meeting.
Oh, Anakin's not a Jedi yet. He's still a Padawan learner. But I was thinking...
Hold on a minute.
Excuse me.
Don't interrupt your date during her important business meeting. Again.
There's some places up there that are very isolated.
Excuse me. I'm in charge of security here, milady.
Don't start promoting the merits of a fascist dictatorship.
Sounds an awful lot like a dictatorship to me.
Well, if it works.
Don't go on a rant about how you went on a rampage and killed men, women, and children.
Like animals. And I slaughtered them like animals.
Don't go on a rampage and kill men, women, and children. And for bonus points, don't talk about how much you hate Sam.
I don't like Sam. It's cold.
Yo! Not for real!
He gets everywhere.
Pretty much
gives a
all of
fuck?
these things should set off red flags, but for whatever reason, they don't. Maybe Padme's just a freak like that. This might be a match made in heaven, who knows? At the very least, the musical theme for them is great. This is the premier new musical piece for this movie, and John Williams gave it his all. Not only does it carry a very romantic feeling behind it, but it also sounds very tragic. There's this undercurrent of unease because we know where all of this is inevitably going to go. Then you have Obi-Wan's side of the story, which is actually a detective story. And that's fun, seeing Obi-Wan do some investigation, figuring things out. I like Ewan McGregor, and he's clearly having fun here. It's also worth noting, though, that Obi-Wan is the world's worst detective. I mean, he needs a kid to tell him that maybe the planet he's searching for that isn't in the archive memory might have been removed. You couldn't have put that together yourself?
Not for real.
He's also bad at investigating the central conspiracy. But that's because if he was good, he'd unravel the entire thing. And we can't have that happening yet. Obi-Wan follows a trail leading him to the planet of Kamino, where he not only finds the bounty hunter Jango Fett, but he also finds that the Kaminoans have been using Jango as a source for their clone army. He's even got his own clone son, Boba Fett. Because he can't just be a regular kid, he's gotta be a clone of his dad. Maybe Django just couldn't find a girlfriend. Happens to the best of us, pal. But this army was apparently requested by Jedi Master Sifo Dyas for the Republic at least 10 years ago. This is cool, but also strange. This request was not sanctioned by the Jedi Council, and Obi-Wan is led to believe that it might have been requested by the Senate without the Council's approval. Meanwhile, Obi-Wan believes Django is the bounty hunter trying to assassinate Padme, and even follows him back to Geonosis, which is the site of a huge battle droid factory and the main operating base for the Separatist army. Obi-Wan even learns that Django wasn't hired by Sifo Dyas, he was hired by a man called Tyrannus. So, through Django, both the clone army and the Separatists are connected, which seems oddly suspicious. Why would these two seemingly opposing armies be connected like that? Well, once captured, Obi-Wan learns directly from Count Dooku that the Republic is under the control of a Sith Lord.
Hundreds of senators are now under the influence of a Sith Lord called Darth Sidious.
Oh boy, that would connect all of this. A Sith Lord overseeing the Republic? Maybe he's manufacturing both sides to sow conflict for some nefarious purpose. How is Obi-Wan gonna respond to that?
I don't believe it.
Oh. Alright. I was thinking that was the big kicker that'd twig you on what's happening, but Obi-Wan doesn't believe Dooku, so he just stops investigating. It's really cool because the reason he has to stop investigating is because he was only a few steps away from figuring it all out. If he decided to dig just a bit deeper, he'd realize that whoever was pulling the strings in the Republic was doing so in order to cause a war that'd give him more power. And who would be in a position to receive more power if a war broke out? Chancellor Palpatine.
Yeah.
Too bad this is only episode 2. We can't be having anyone figuring that out just yet. We gotta save that for next time.
Yeah.
Palpatine does get emergency powers though, granted to him by Jar Jar Binks. Only after like first grade level manipulation, of course.
But what senator would have the courage to propose such a plan?
If only Senator Amidala were here.
A few moments later.
It's a propose that the Senate give immediately emergency powers to the Supreme Chancellor.
And so, a clone army is officially sanctioned by the Senate, and Yoda heads to Kamino to begin recruiting them into the Republic, which leads everything to the finale. Thankfully, this finale does not add to the others by having 5 simultaneous final battles. I mean, we've reached critical mass with 4. 5 would be a nightmare. Instead, we get a string of big sequences laid back to back. We have a big sequence inside of a droid factory, which, outside of the fact that it's clearly rushed, I don't mind it. It's at least a novel idea by this point, so. But things certainly get better once we enter the big Geonosian arena. This bit is pretty cool, with our 3 heroes back against the wall as these huge creatures approach, ready to kill them.
I've got a bad feeling about this.
Well, yeah, I'd be concerned if you didn't. But this sequence is fun. It's more interesting than some other bits because it's one of the few moments in the movie where the characters have to make it out without their lightsabers. But that doesn't last too long as suddenly an army of Jedi appear. And for the first time, this movie delivers on the promise of seeing the Jedi in their prime. A couple hundred Jedi face off against a whole bunch of battle droids. Even the new super battle droids, which are only slightly tougher. Mace Windu is even here, and he's carrying a purple lightsaber. Everyone else either gets blue or green, but here comes this guy rocking the grape-flavored lightsaber.
The grape
because Samuel L. Jackson wanted it. Not only so that
Wait
he
a
could say
minute.
how Jedi
Why would he say grape flavored? Yo. Oh my god. Only reason I'm taking it differently because the nigga is black. Like why? Oh shit.
But also because purple looks cool.
Good guys are green and blue, bad guys are red. That's just the way it works.
Go purple attitude.
You might get purple.
And it does look cool, even when Mace Windu charges up and kills Jango Fett. I guess this really means the investigation is over. Could have asked that guy some follow-up questions about his connection to both sides of this whole thing, but
Real
he's dead.
life.
So, but then the whole
Mace
thing
wasn't trying
leads
to
to
hear
the
that shit, though.
beginning of the Clone Wars, because suddenly Yoda shows up with a clone army to turn the tide. The battle from here gets so much bigger. An army of droids versus an army of clones. A battle the scale of which had never been seen before. Once again, the direction is quite different once the CG sequences take over. But there are some benefits, like one bit where the area is covered in dust and you can see the blaster fire glowing in the air, a first for the series. And there are a couple of snap zooms, which look significantly better than the digital zooms because these ones behave like a camera lens actually should. It is weird, though, that the Jedi immediately become soldiers once this battle kicks off. There's no hesitation. They're now generals on the battlefield.
We're keepers of the peace, not soldiers.
A few moments later.
Around the survivors. Perimeter 3A.
It's just an immediate turn, which could make sense if that was made into a very central storyline in the movie. Maybe seeing some Jedi voice dissenting views on this whole idea. More people arguing back and forth about what the role of the Jedi is and what it could become if war breaks out. Because as it stands, these guys are just huge hypocrites who suck. Maybe that's the point, though. Who knows?
Yeah.
Then it all leads into a climactic lightsaber duel where Obi-Wan and Anakin face off against Count Dooku. And this fight definitely doesn't live up to the Maul fight from last time. The choreography is nowhere near as intricately detailed or visually exciting. There is one bit where the lights go out and the lightsabers glow against their faces. That's a first. They're not doing anything interesting with that, but it is a thing that happens. And then the fight ends with loss. Obi-Wan gets pricked a couple times by Dooku, and then Anakin, well... Yo, it's a reference to that other movie. But despite that seeming loss, this fight's not over yet, because Yoda pops in and fights Dooku one-on-one. And on a technical level, there is something to be said about this achievement. This wicked fast little frog guy jumping around and slashing at Dooku with a lightsaber. There's only one little thing. To me, Yoda should never use a lightsaber.
Why?
When the character was introduced in Empire, he was primarily defined by the fact that his size didn't matter. Even though he was a 2-foot-tall frogman, he was stronger than anyone. Exactly. It was the whole bait and switch of the reveal, turning our preconceived notions about what a powerful character would look like entirely on its head.
Luminous being shall be. Not this crude matter.
The magic of Yoda is that he is super powerful without needing his physical size. It's the whole point of his appearance in Empire. But once you give him a lightsaber, suddenly you're putting him in a confrontation where his physical stature is a lot more important. He's now going to jump around in order to even match a regular-sized human. His lightsaber is even shorter than all the others, so he's got to do even more work to live up to everyone else. I don't mind giving Yoda...
That's a good thing. Like, I don't understand.
If it was just him
That's
and
dope
Dooku
as
trying
shit.
to outwit each other with the Force, not outmaneuver each other with lightsabers. But ultimately, Dooku manages to distract Yoda, allowing him to escape. He flees Geonosis as our characters regroup, giving the movie its climactic moment to see us out. Dooku reunites with his master, the sinister Darth Sidious. Yoda declares that the Clone Wars have begun, and now we see the army of clones mounting up for war, set to the tune of the Imperial March. Now that's a good musical choice, letting us know that the Republic under Palpatine is well on its way to becoming the Empire. And it's accomplished entirely with music, no dialogue whatsoever. Good work on that. And finally, despite all of the red flags, it turns out Padme is a freak like that and decides to marry Anakin in secret, beginning a new era of hiding their lives from everyone they know. And with an iris close, the movie wraps up. That's Attack of the Clones. Overall, mileage will vary, but I think it's still not that great. It's a technologically impressive movie that also has the strange distinction of looking fantastic at some points and absolutely terrible at others. Reviews were still mixed. Some claimed that this might have been the worst movie of the series, but others said that it was a definite step up from Phantom Menace, maybe even being better than Return of the Jedi. A lot of fans still didn't
Type
like it,
shit.
however. It
I can
wasn't
see where they
nearly
coming
as
from.
shocking
Type
as the
shit.
disappointment was the first time. Fans were not prepared for the possibility, but some inevitably walked out of the theater not entirely enthused with what they had seen. Some definitely enjoyed it more than Phantom Menace, and it certainly played well with kids, which again might be the only thing that matters. The box office for the movie was also nothing to sneeze at. Across its run, Attack of the Clones made a whopping $302 million domestically and $645 million worldwide, which was a step down from Phantom Menace, but that's not unexpected. Empire made less than the first movie when it was released in 1980, so... However, this was the first Star Wars movie that wasn't the biggest movie of the year, falling behind Sam Raimi's Spider-Man domestically, as well as the second Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings movies worldwide. Star Wars was still one of the biggest things around, but for just this one year, it wasn't the top dog, with plenty of other franchises entering the fray to capture audiences just like the original Star Wars trilogy did 20 years earlier. This new movie did do something the others didn't, however. It briefly saw a release in IMAX in November of 2002.
Oh, word?
It was never shot for IMAX.
IMAX was around that long?
Biggest screens around.
I didn't know IMAX was around that long. Real talk.
The event. The only issue was, due to technical limitations, IMAX showings could only be 120 minutes max, and Attack of the Clones was 142 minutes total, not only making it the longest Star Wars movie, but too long for a standard IMAX screening. So, when shown in IMAX, 22 minutes of the movie were removed in order to fit it into the screening. So if you saw it on the biggest screens around, it would have been a much shorter movie, missing key moments that were deemed not essential enough for the 120-minute showcase. All in all, Attack of the Clones left fans in a very similar spot that Phantom Menace did, still receiving mixed reception from fans and critics, and still often claimed as being much worse than the original trilogy. If for nothing else, though, this did mean that there was one movie left. One more movie to close out the entire saga. Episode 3 was going to be the big one. The one to close the gap between the prequels and originals. Fans would finally see the rise of Darth Vader and the fall of the Republic. Only 3 more years and Episode 3 would close out the entire saga. Only 3 more years and Star Wars will finally be complete.
Return the stolen butterfly.
So, with it being 9:55, I will let y'all know right now that I am not going to watch Episode 3 part today. Most likely, Episode 3 is going to be saved until Friday. Most likely Friday. And then we just going to go into the sequel trilogy after that. I'm going to keep my game here just in case I decide to come back for whatever reason. But we're not going to watch Episode 3 tonight. We might watch the build-up. That's it. But actually watching, whatever, not going to happen. Because to be honest, it's about to start now. It's got some shit to go through. Minutes is crazy. So, I think we should end it right here.
It's for writing episode.
Real shit, I think we should end it right here. I really think we should end it right here. Because I'm not going to finish it the way that I want to. As well as I want to right now, it's not going to be finished. So we got the first one out the way. We got a good 2/3 of the second part out the way. That way, once we go in, like literally. Because the sequel trilogy one is 4 fucking hours. 4 hours. And just the build up and episode 3 is an hour because I stopped it at 2:07 and it ends at 3:07. So that's an hour. So that's 5 hours. So let's just say I come home from work after 6 or 7 or whatever. So let's just say 7. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So we either might save that whole thing until Saturday or Sunday. Real shit. Because I'm not gonna be up till fucking 12. I think I was last night or Friday. I think. So it just depends on how my day go that Friday. But 5 hours, crazy. And I really want to finish this. That since I started off, I want to finish it. I really do. And they got an Andor one, which is like the 4th installment of this complete retrospective. I don't watch Andor. I really don't like Rogue One like that. So unless they gonna be including the other shows and shit, I'm not gonna watch that. So yeah, let me check my notifications right quick. It's 10 o'clock right now. It's 10 o'clock right now. So yeah, we just gonna end it right here.
Episode 3. 8 more years, and Star Wars will finally be complete.
I'll stop it right there. Seriously, so serious. I'm gonna exit out right there. Cool. You feel me? So yeah. With that being said, let me go ahead and just get ready for bed. Real talk. Yeah, Dante dropped that bitch an hour ago. And I will watch that. I ain't gonna lie. I want to watch it on my own first.
Yo, YouTube, ladies and gentlemen, we... Who's next? Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, bro. This gotta be the worst superhero universe of all time. Originally, I was planning to do a video similar to the one I made last year. But while I was watching this season, Mark really wasn't getting whooped. I was really watching like, damn, he might actually beat me. So I can't even make a video roasting him for real. Good job. But I'm still watching this season and something just not clicking with me, bro. Because every episode I'm watching, I'm just like, dog, this man's life is trash. But every time I watch this show and really put it into perspective, I realize this is one of the worst superhero lives I have ever seen on the screen. I promise you, you wouldn't want to be invincible. You wouldn't want to be anybody in this universe. I would go as far as to say I would rather live in Gotham than the Invincible universe. And I know some of y'all might hear me say that and say, not the cap. And yeah, Gotham's pretty horrible too. You gotta deal with villains like Harley Quinn who gave game consoles to little children and watched it blow up in their face from the skylines. So yeah, I'm aware that Satan's greatest soldiers are in Gotham City. So whether if you want to deal with that or deal with an alien flying through you on a random beach day, that is entirely up to you. But me personally, I would feel much safer with a city patrolled by Batman than this planet where the best superheroes are getting done like this.
all starts with adding Cox Mobile. You'll get...
Like I'm telling y'all, it's actually so sad. No matter which of these three you choose, you are going to live a terrible life. Now we're gonna start the video off with the main character. And I know there's gonna be at least 3 dorks in my comments talking about some, yes, I wanna be invincible, yes, I'm not gonna be a hero, yes, I wanna crack Eve. Like, whoa, brother, relax. Contain your lust for me, little bro. Thank you. But in all seriousness, nah, you don't wanna be this guy. Like, I understand why Invincible goes through all this trauma and pain. His name stands for his willpower and not his fighting track record. Just like my last video, I'll always poke jokes at it, but at the end of the day, that's what it is. Life is just hard for this nigga. But damn, I didn't know y'all meant life hard for everybody. Like, why do I, as a regular civilian, have to deal with getting jumped by superpowered twins for no reason? Like, this nigga just got pile drive for doing his job. Even if we keep it at just Mark, the suffering that he has to go through is pushed to such a logical extreme, I don't even think I can co-sign it. Because what I hear from the comics, it gets so much worse. I should have known they was on bullshit when the first season title cards were representing him getting constantly beat up in every fight. I swear for the writers, it's a fetish. Like, nigga, his second day as a hero, he had to fight the entire Thraxan army with a bunch of role players. Now I want y'all to look me in my eyes as I ask this question. What are you doing against the army with duplicating your roster? Like, they really have my man 2 days in the league carrying 3 G Leaguers and a mini-pack against, I'ma say it again, an entire army. Like, Cecil not even doing his job, nigga, where's the help? And I'd pray if you were a civilian during this conflict, cause bruh, oh nah. As you can clearly see, them boys got wiped out. And even if they survived this conflict, they blew up 2 more times in the same week, with decades of advancements, and they're 50 times stronger. Like, I don't know what the writers were thinking, making this up, up, down, down, left, right, ass beast.
Hold on.
For doing his job. Even if we keep it at just Mark, the suffering that he has to go through is pushed to such a logical extreme, I don't even think I can co-sign it. Because what I hear from the comics, it gets so much worse. I should have known they was on bullshit when the first season title cards were representing him getting constantly beat up in every fight. I swear for the writers, it's a fetish. Like, nigga, his second day as a hero, he had to fight the entire Thraxan army with a bunch of role players. Now I want y'all to look me in my eyes as I ask this question. What are you doing against the army with duplicating your roster? Like, they really have my man 2 days in the league carrying 3 G Leaguers and a mini-pack against, I'ma say it again, an entire army. Like, Cecil not even doing his job, nigga, where's the help? And I'd pray if you were a civilian during this conflict, cause bruh, oh nah. As you can clearly see, them boys got wiped out. And even if they survived this conflict, they blew up 2 more times in the same week, with decades of advancements, and they're 50 times stronger. Like, I don't know what the writers were thinking, making this up, up, down, down, left, right, ass species. Because what do you mean these niggas spun the same block over decades? Like, I know decades ain't a lot for some of you niggas. You can add 40 years to Samuel Jackson's life, the niggas still look 80. But for the rest of us, plural decades are a long time. And they got decades stronger in 3 days. Nigga, that ain't even fair. And even though they came back decades stronger, Cecil still only brings 5 niggas.
You idiot. You watched me, idiot. What was wrong with you?
I'm not gonna lie, Mark, I strangled that nigga too, cause what is wrong with Brody? It's like the writers were just glazing the villains to no end. Like, I've really never seen a series like this where the heroes are so much weaker than the villains on every occasion, with a lot of it being completely unfair. Like, I mess with Machine Head. He's a great villain, very funny character. Nigga, how did you get Battle Beast on your roster? That shouldn't even be possible. This is like Kingpin having Galactus as an employee. Nigga, I will harm you. Invincible is not the only show to do something like this. I can go into One Piece where in one of their earlier adventures, Zoro had to fight the strongest swordsman on that planet, and he got absolutely bodied. But you know, that fight didn't just happen for him to be beat. It was a lesson. It was motivation. Zoro was really on the floor talking about some I will never lose again. Like, I be reading that with tears in my eyes, dog. That's a real nigga. But Invincible, on the other hand, you wanna know all this man got? He got turned into a Playboy Cardi album cover. What lesson do you learn from that? I'll give you the answer. Nigga, nothing. Like, I've never seen a nigga get this universally hoed to this much of an extent. But y'all see the show, man. There is so much BS like this Invincible gotta deal with. There is less than like 30 heroes on this damn planet, yet there's a new superorganism or supervillain found every single week. And they're, for some reason, always stronger than the heroes. And not to mention, there's an entire army stronger than all of them that can come in at any moment's notice. Even though I was just dissing Cecil, I'm on his side for this one. But what type of math is that? And even these villains that constantly spawn in every week would vehemently piss me off. All of these villains are middle-aged men with no emotional maturity and cannot listen to reason for more than 4 effing seconds. Like, all of these villains are just misunderstanding the scenario to the point of pure idiocy.
You killed my sister!
You killed my sister! You killed my sister!
The Silverado Trail Boss. Like, these villains have to be the stupidest ones I've ever seen in fiction. And I know a lot of comic villains are built on very stupid motivations. Harry Osborn is another motivation, with just a simple talk would have resolved everything. But I think you seeing Spider-Man carrying your dead father in your living room is a lot more believable than just being blatantly wrong. Now, I've seen a lot of people call Angstrom a hypocrite, but with him you could at least say he didn't always hate Invincible. His main goal was actually something completely different before his machine backfired on him. And it wasn't until his machine exploded where he went insane. And I mean, like, sure, I don't know how a nigga with a KSI built head has brain cells this useless. Nigga got all that space for nothing. But you know, let's just say he went insane. Like, Angstrom's still stupid as hell for picking the only good Invincible out of all the ones he could have picked. All the Invincibles that killed your family are still alive, and you went to spin back on this nigga. Bro, go stain them. You're really out here hiring your ops instead of slamming them out. What will Shiesty say? Nigga, that's what I'm saying. My angst are really like them roasters in middle school that are getting flamed by someone else. But the moment you start laughing, they try to come at you. Like, nigga, you a bitch. Angstrom's still stupid. If I was Invincible, I'd be mad as hell. But for now, I'll let it slide. Powerplex, though? Nah, this nigga pussy. Everything about this nigga is just wrong. If you and Invincible talked for 4 effing seconds, you would have known that A, he's the victim, B, he's the victim, and C, he's the victim. He did not mercilessly kill your family. Like, Breaking Bad Jesse over here was really pissing me off, but this could have been solved in a single convo. And I know he tried several times to call Invincible's attention, but let's be real, none of them are going to be peaceful, number one. And the situation you ended up getting him in is so stupid. Like, he was really talking to his family like, damn, babe, I don't know how to get his attention. I tried everything I could. Yeah, baby. You know what? That's a great idea. I don't care if this was an act. I don't care if this was a skit. I don't care if it was fake. What type of person gags a baby to get back at a nigga? This is literally reverse Flash levels of petty. And Invincible has to deal with this every single week. Like, Powerplex really done murked his entire family and then looked at Invincible like,
Alright, so let's kill him.
I'm not gonna lie, Mark, this is a valid crash out, bro. I would have painted the city in his blood. Like, it's so funny. No matter what Invincible tries to do, everything is painted as his fault. And not only that, if anybody has a conflict, he is miraculously the only superhero to ever exist in their eyes to help them. Omni-Man tricking him off Earth, the twins just forcing him to fight the Immortal. Like, this has to be a crime or something. You kidnapped him on a date to go to the future. Nigga, he ain't asked for this. And I'm skimming over so much. This ain't even counting the war. Imagine the planet getting ravaged by people that look just like you. This ain't even counting conquest. And again, what I hear from people who read the comics, it only gets worse. And not only does he literally never get time to be a regular person, I would say his life is just as annoying, if not worse. Now, I know he got Eve. He was finally pushed to ask her out because William told him to. Shout out to all my gay niggas. Hit her with the default banger line.
When I was lying on the ground, with that sound drilling into my head,
only thing I could think about was you.
Incredible.
That is truly what you call sensational game. He gotta start teaching the streets. We got niggas outside risen like these.
Body team. Bro. I'm trying to get my hand like that.
And I know you see Eve right here. She's so bad. I ain't done that in a minute, but I'm truly grateful that the Lord has blessed me to play in some snow. But even with Miss Eve, I still wouldn't want to be this nigga because of Oliver. Oliver is a special case. Oliver is the annoying little brother times 11. Because he's not annoying to everybody else. He's only annoying to Invincible. It's as if he wants to make his life worse. And unless you are a POC willing to discipline him with the shakla, my dog, you not handling him. This man had a loving family growing up. His entire life, going from royalty to the suburbs, that's barely a downgrade. Yet he still turned out to be King Von. How does this even happen? But I'm telling you, he's only being annoying to Invincible. When he kills the Mauler twins, he's gonna apologize in front of the heroes. But once Invincible tries to check him, now all of a sudden you want to start speaking like this.
It's not precious. People kill each other all the time. And most people aren't even special like us. They're just normal.
This nigga is crazy.
This
Yeah, I ain't
nigga
gonna lie, I'm not letting that slide if that was me. You just got finished apologizing, but now that you're talking to me, you want to act like you're correct? I ain't dealing with that, bro. I'm gonna handle you. Like, just let me catch that nigga sneak out the house. And you know, they again trying to be a respectful family. And when they talk it out with him, he's like this.
Mama didn't have friends or family.
Yeah, nah, bro. Just like when the parents say, there was no science. And it's a kid drawing imaginary friends like this. And they be like, I don't think he likes me, Dad. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, gang. You're finished. But as y'all can see, bro, Invincible's life, the villains he gotta deal with, even his little brother. I promise you, I would never want to live his life, let alone live in the Invincible universe, bro.
The video. I haven't watched Gumball in a little minute, so fuck it.
It's been through a lot.
Something to go to sleep to.
We'll get there.
A little 3-hour compilation.
It's okay. You're safe here.
Ah.
We are beacons of trust. And we're not going anywhere. That's why I got a Subaru.
The Subaru Forester. Safe, long-lasting, trusted, loved.
The Subaru Loves Love event is going on now. Visit Subaru Baton Rouge, Inline Highway, or online at SubaruBR.com. Complimentary maintenance included.
But yeah, I'm about to turn this off right quick. Alrighty.
And we're your friends. You guys aren't my friends. You just trashed my parents' house.
Alrighty.
Don't worry, I'll tidy it up. Yeah, sure. You're gonna tidy all this up? Of course. Don't you know I'm part suckerfish? Thanks. What's your name? Darwin, Radlin, Caspian, Ahab, Poseidon, Nicodemus, Watterson, the third.
The third,
You
nigga.
don't seem so bad for a kid.
Yes, sir. It is 10/18. March 23rd.
Hey, how's your day? Great. How's yours?
Yeah, March 23rd. Sunday, March 23rd, 10:18 p.m.
Do you remember
I'll
that
see y'all
episode?
motherfuckers Friday or earlier. You feel me?
Jelly in my peanut butter sandwich?
I fucks with y'all, cause y'all fucks with me. But you don't fuck with me. I don't even wanna see you.